Lindai was folding laundry in her small apartment when her phone suddenly buzzed on the kitchen counter. She almost ignored it. Most messages from her family were either short favors or last-minute updates about events she was never really included in. But when she picked up the phone and saw her mother's name, her chest tightened a little. "Quick family dinner tonight. Don't be late." That was it. No heart emoji. No explanation. No warmth. Just those 5 words. Lindai stared at the message for a few seconds longer than she should have. Felt strange. Her mother, Beatrice, rarely invited her anywhere personally. Most of the time, she only heard about family dinners after pictures were already posted online. Smiling faces. Expensive restaurants. Her younger sister Amara standing proudly in the center while Lindai remained forgotten somewhere outside the frame. Over the years, she had slowly gotten used to it. The ignored phone calls. The empty seat that was never saved for her. The way conversations suddenly changed when she entered a room. Still, this message felt different. For the first time in a long while, a small piece of hope quietly slipped into her heart. Maybe things were changing. Maybe her mother finally wanted peace. Maybe all those years of distance were finally ending. Lindai walked to her bedroom and opened her closet carefully. She stood there for a moment, touching hangers one by one, trying to decide what to wear. She hated how nervous she suddenly felt. A part of her kept whispering not to expect too much. But another part, the softer part she always tried to protect, wanted this dinner to mean something. Wanted to feel chosen for once. As the sun slowly disappeared behind the Cape Town skyline, Lindai got ready with a nervous smile she hadn't worn in years, completely unaware that by the end of the night, that same family would wish they had never sent the invitation at all. By the time Lindai's taxi pulled up outside the restaurant, the sky above Cape Town had turned deep orange and gold. The waterfront glittered with reflections from the city lights, and the place looked far more expensive than anything her family usually booked for a quick dinner. She stepped out slowly, smoothing her dress nervously before looking up at the giant glass building in front of her. Luxury cars lined the entrance. Valets rushed back and forth. Soft music floated through the open doors while laughter spilled outside into the night air. Lindai paused. Something already felt wrong. As she walked toward the entrance, she noticed a large flower arrangement beside the doors. Gold ribbons, white roses, expensive decorations everywhere. This was not a small dinner. The moment she stepped inside, her stomach tightened. The restaurant was packed. Dozens of people filled the room. Extended relatives she hadn't seen in years. Family friends. Business-looking guests holding champagne glasses. People dressed in elegant suits and sparkling dresses. Cameras flashed from different corners of the room while waiters carried trays of expensive drinks through the crowd. Near the center, a giant decorated backdrop stood against the wall with glowing lights wrapped around it. Lindai blinked slowly, trying to understand what she was looking at. Her mother had called this a quick family dinner. This looked like a full celebration. Her heels clicked softly against the marble floor as she walked further inside. A few relatives noticed her immediately. Some gave short, awkward smiles. Others quickly looked away like they weren't expecting her to actually show up. That feeling in her chest started growing heavier. Confusion. Embarrassment. Unease. She spotted her younger sister Amara across the room wearing a stunning silver dress, surrounded by people taking pictures of her. Tendai stood proudly beside her in a sharp black suit, laughing while guests congratulated them. Lindai's eyebrows slowly pulled together. Nobody had told her about any celebration. Nobody explained why everyone was here. And somehow, standing in the middle of that beautiful restaurant filled with lights, music and smiling faces, Lindai suddenly felt completely out of place. Like everyone knew something she didn't. Her eyes searched for her mother through the crowd, hoping for some kind of explanation. But deep down, an uncomfortable feeling had already started whispering inside her. She wasn't invited there to be included. She was invited there for something else entirely. Lindai finally spotted her mother near the center table, standing beside Amara while talking to a group of guests. Relief immediately washed over her chest. At least now she could finally understand what was happening. She forced a small smile onto her face and started walking toward the family section. The closer she got, the more eyes slowly turned toward her. Some relatives whispered quietly. Others suddenly went silent. Lindau tried to ignore it. Maybe they were just surprised to see her there. She reached the large decorated table where the rest of the family was seated. Empty chairs surrounded Amara and Tendai. For one brief second, Lindau actually thought maybe one of those seats had been saved for her. Then her mother looked up. Beatrice's eyes moved over Lindau's dress for a quick second before her expression flattened completely. Lindau gave a nervous smile. "Hi, Mom." But before she could even pull out a chair, Beatrice casually lifted one finger. "No," she said coldly. "Not there." The words landed harder than Lindau expected. The conversations around them immediately started slowing down. Lindau froze with her hand still resting on the chair. "What?" she asked quietly. Beatrice didn't repeat herself right away. She simply pointed across the restaurant toward the far back corner near the windows. A tiny table sat there alone. One chair. No decorations. No family. Far away from the laughter, cameras, and celebration. "That table suits you better," Beatrice said with a small smile that never reached her eyes. For a second, Lindau honestly thought she had heard wrong. But then she noticed the reactions around her. Amara avoided eye contact completely while pretending to fix her bracelet. Tendai looked down at his drink. A few cousins exchanged uncomfortable glances. Someone near the back actually let out a nervous laugh before quickly going quiet again. The humiliation hit slowly, then all at once. Her chest tightened so hard it became difficult to breathe. Every single person there had just watched her get rejected from her own family table like she didn't belong there. And somehow the worst part wasn't even the table itself. It was how normal Beatrice made it sound, like Lindau should have already known her place. The restaurant suddenly felt too bright, too loud, too public. Lindau could feel strangers staring at her from nearby tables now, trying to understand the tension filling the room. For one painful moment, she considered turning around and leaving completely. But instead, she swallowed the lump rising in her throat, forced her face to stay calm, and slowly walked toward the lonely table in the corner while the entire room silently watched her humiliation unfold. Lindau sat alone at the small corner table, trying to act like everything was fine even though her hands were trembling under the tablecloth. From where she sat, she could clearly see the main celebration happening across the room. Guests gathered around Amara and Tendai with huge smiles, raising glasses while cameras flashed every few seconds. Then one of the waiters rolled out a giant white cake covered in gold flowers. The words written across the top made Lindau's stomach drop. "Congratulations, Amara and Tendai. Engagement celebration." Lindau blinked slowly at the cake, feeling the last little bit of confusion disappear. This wasn't a random family dinner. This was Amara's engagement party, and everyone had known except her. A painful heat crawled up her chest as memories started connecting inside her head. The sudden invitation, the formal clothes, the decorations, the strange looks when she arrived. She hadn't been invited to celebrate. She had been invited to be hidden. Her eyes slowly moved back toward the family table. Amara was glowing under the lights while relatives surrounded her with attention and praise. "That girl did everything right," one aunt proudly said loud enough for Lindau to hear. "Beautiful career, beautiful fiancé, beautiful future." Another voice answered with a quiet laugh. Unlike some people, a few relatives glanced toward Lindau's isolated table before quickly looking away again. The message could not have been clearer. In their eyes, Amara was the successful daughter. Lindau was the disappointment they tolerated quietly, not because she was rude, not because she had failed anyone, but because she didn't fit the image they wanted. She wasn't married. She didn't post luxury pictures online. She kept to herself, and since she never bragged about her life, the family assumed she had accomplished nothing. Beatrice had once even told her directly during an argument, "You bring heavy energy into every room." Heavy energy. Lindau never forgot those words. What her mother really meant was simple. Amara made the family look impressive. Lindau did not. That was why she had been pushed into the back corner tonight, like some embarrassing secret nobody wanted too close to the cameras. A waiter quietly placed a drink in front of her before hurrying away awkwardly. Lindiao looked around the crowded restaurant again, surrounded by laughter that somehow made her loneliness feel even louder. And sitting there alone while her own family celebrated without her, she finally understood something painful. This humiliation had not happened by accident. Every detail had been planned before she even walked through those doors. As laughter echoed through the restaurant, Lindiao sat quietly at the small table near the windows, slowly turning the untouched glass in her hands. From a distance, she probably looked exactly how her family imagined her. Quiet, lonely, unsuccessful. That was the story they had created about her years ago, and nobody ever questioned it after that. Whenever relatives asked about Lindiao, Beatrice would always answer with the same tired smile. She's still figuring life out. Sometimes Amara would add little comments that sounded innocent but weren't. You know how Lindiao is. She likes small things. Small things. Small life. Small future. That was what everyone believed. None of them knew that almost every assumption they made about her was wrong. Because while they were busy judging her silence, Lindiao had been building something enormous. Her mind drifted back to the past few years. The sleepless nights. The tiny office she started with barely enough money to pay rent. The endless meetings where people underestimated her the second she walked into the room. Men in expensive suits who smiled politely while assuming she was somebody's assistant. Investors who ignored her ideas until her numbers became impossible to deny. She remembered eating instant noodles at midnight while reviewing hotel contracts alone. Remembered crying quietly in parking lots after failed pitches before forcing herself to try again the next morning. Nobody from her family was there during those moments. Nobody encouraged her. Nobody believed in her long enough to even ask questions. So eventually, Lindiao stopped explaining herself, and slowly, year after year, she built her hospitality company in silence. Boutique hotels, luxury event spaces, private investment partnerships. By 32, her company had already expanded into multiple cities across South Africa. And just 3 days ago, she had finalized a massive international deal with investors that would push her business into another level completely. But publicly, almost nobody knew her face. Lindiao avoided interviews, avoided social media, avoided attention. She preferred peace over showing off. While Amara posted luxury dinners online for validation, Lindiao quietly signed contracts worth millions behind closed doors. And the craziest part, the very restaurant her family proudly rented tonight was connected to her company's growing investment network. But nobody sitting in that crowded room knew it yet. To them, she was still the unsuccessful daughter sitting alone at the back table. Lindiao looked toward her family again as they laughed loudly under the golden lights. Then she lowered her eyes with a soft, almost sad smile, because for the first time all night, she realized the people humiliating her were actually the ones who understood her the least. Lindiao was quietly scrolling through her phone, pretending not to notice the celebration happening without her, when the atmosphere inside the restaurant suddenly changed. First it was small. A few staff members near the entrance straightened their posture. One waiter quickly adjusted his tie. Another rushed toward the front doors. Then the restaurant manager appeared looking unusually nervous. People near the entrance started whispering, "Is that him? I think that's the owner." Lindiao barely looked up at first. She assumed it had nothing to do with her. But then she noticed a tall man in a dark tailored suit walking into the restaurant surrounded by 2 staff members. His presence immediately shifted the energy in the room. Even guests who didn't know him moved aside instinctively as he walked through the crowd. It was Kelechi Nwosu, the owner of the entire waterfront property, one of the most respected names in Cape Town's luxury hospitality industry. Amara instantly sat straighter at the family table, clearly excited. Tendai quickly fixed his jacket while Beatrice's face lit up with fake confidence. They all assumed he was coming to greet important guests at the main celebration. Kelechi scanned the room once, then twice. Suddenly his eyes stopped, directly on Lindiao. For a split second, surprise crossed his face. And then, without hesitation, he started walking toward the back corner of the restaurant, toward her table. The room slowly grew quieter with every step he took. Lindio finally looked up properly, slightly confused herself now. Kelechi reached her table and immediately smiled warmly. "Ma'am," he said respectfully. Before Lindio could even stand, he pulled the chair back for her himself. "We weren't informed you'd be attending personally tonight." The entire restaurant went silent, completely silent. Even the music suddenly felt distant. Lindio noticed several heads turning instantly toward them. A waiter nearly dropped a tray. At the family table, Amara's smile disappeared completely. Beatrice blinked rapidly like her brain was struggling to process what she was hearing. Because this was not the kind of greeting restaurant owners gave random guests. Especially not to someone sitting alone at the worst table in the room. Kelechi looked genuinely concerned as he glanced around the isolated corner. "Why are you seated here?" he asked carefully. "This arrangement is unacceptable." Lindio opened her mouth slightly, unsure what to say. Across the room, she could physically feel the shift happening. The same people who had ignored her all night were suddenly staring at her differently now. Confused, curious, nervous, and for the very first time since arriving, Lindio was no longer invisible. Kelechi remained standing beside Lindio's table, still looking disturbed by the situation. "I sincerely apologize for this," he said quietly. "If we had known you were attending, proper arrangements would have been made immediately." Lindio gave a small, uncomfortable smile. "It's fine, really." But across the restaurant, nothing felt fine anymore. The room had completely changed. Guests who had ignored her earlier were now openly staring. Whispers spread from table to table. "Who is she? Why is Kelechi talking to her like that?" Even the photographers near Amara's table had stopped taking pictures. Beatrice suddenly stood up, forcing an awkward laugh. "Mr. Nwosu," she called out loudly, trying to regain control of the room. "Please don't worry. It was only a small misunderstanding." Kelechi turned toward her politely. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. "With respect, ma'am," he replied calmly. "Ms. Okafor is one of the key investors behind this property expansion. We take her comfort very seriously." Silence. Absolute silence. It felt like the air itself disappeared from the room. Lindio's eyes widened slightly. Even she hadn't expected him to say it so directly. Amara's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. Tendai looked genuinely confused now. And Beatrice? Beatrice's face slowly lost all color. Kelechi continued speaking, completely unaware that he was destroying the fake image this family had built about Lindio for years. "In fact," he added warmly, "the entire waterfront renovation project only moved forward because her company helped fund it." A quiet gasp escaped from somewhere near the main table. One cousin whispered, "What?" Another relative immediately pulled out their phone, clearly searching Lindio's name online. Kelechi smiled proudly at Lindio like none of this was shocking information. "She prefers staying private," he explained casually to the confused guests nearby. "Most people don't realize how much of the hospitality network in this city connects back to her investment group." Now people weren't just staring anymore. They were looking at her completely differently. Like the entire room had suddenly realized they had judged the wrong person all night. Lindio could physically feel the shift happening around her. The same relatives who once mocked her quiet lifestyle were now looking nervous, embarrassed, almost afraid. Then Kelechi unknowingly delivered the final blow. He glanced around the restaurant proudly before saying, "Technically speaking, tonight's event is happening inside part of Ms. Okafor's extended property network." Beatrice grabbed the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her expression looked frozen between shock and humiliation. Because in one single moment, the truth became impossible to hide anymore. The daughter they treated like an embarrassment was more powerful than every single person in that room combined. The energy inside the restaurant changed so fast it almost felt unreal. Only minutes ago, Lindio had been sitting alone at the forgotten table in the back corner while waiters barely looked at her. Now suddenly, Staff members were rushing toward her from every direction. One manager pulled out a chair respectfully. Another apologized 3 different times for the seating arrangement. A waiter quickly removed the lonely single-place setting from her table like it had become embarrassing to even look at. "Ms. Okafor," the restaurant manager said nervously, "please allow us to move you to our premium waterfront section." The entire room watched as staff immediately began preparing the best table in the restaurant, a beautiful private section overlooking the ocean with candlelight, flowers, and a direct view of the Cape Town skyline. The same guests who had ignored her earlier were now whispering non-stop. "That's the owner's investor. I heard she funded half the expansion. Wait, that's Lindiao." Phones quietly came out under tables as people searched her company online. And one by one, shocked expressions started spreading across the room. 'Cause suddenly everything made sense. Quiet lifestyle, privacy, the confidence she carried without trying to impress anyone. Lindiao stood slowly while staff carefully guided her toward the VIP section. Her face remained calm, but inside, emotions twisted heavily in her chest. Not pride, not revenge, just disbelief at how quickly people changed once money entered the conversation. As she walked past the family table, the silence there felt painfully thick. Beatrice couldn't even look at her properly anymore. Tendai stared down at his plate. But Amara looked furious. Not sad. Not embarrassed. Furious. The attention had shifted away from her engagement completely, and she could feel it happening in real time. Guests who had crowded around her earlier were now distracted, staring at Lindiao instead. Even the photographers seemed unsure where to point their cameras now. Amara suddenly forced a tight smile. "This is becoming a little dramatic, don't you think?" she muttered loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. But nobody responded, because nobody wanted to offend the woman they had just discovered practically owned the space they were standing in. Then another surprise came. A man wearing a white chef's coat personally walked out from the kitchen and approached Lindiao with a respectful nod. "The executive chef would like to prepare a custom menu for you tonight, ma'am," he said warmly. "Your preferences are already being arranged." A few guests actually gasped quietly. That level of treatment was reserved for elite clients only. Lindiao noticed every eye in the room watching her reaction now. But instead of acting arrogant, she simply smiled softly and thanked the staff politely. And somehow that calmness made the entire situation even more powerful. Because while everyone else around her was panicking, whispering or staring in shock, Lindiao remained the only person in the room fully in control. The restaurant no longer sounded the same. The laughter was gone. The confidence at the family table had completely disappeared. Now the room was filled with low whispers, nervous glances, and uncomfortable silence every time someone looked toward Lindiao. She sat calmly at the beautiful waterfront table while city lights reflected across the ocean behind her. Staff moved carefully around her now, treating her with the kind of respect her own family had never shown. Then slowly, Beatrice stood up. Lindiao noticed it immediately. Her mother fixed her expression before walking across the restaurant with a smile that looked painfully forced. Several relatives watched closely as she approached, clearly curious to see what would happen next. Beatrice stopped beside Lindiao's table and gave a small awkward laugh. "Well," she said lightly, "this whole thing became much bigger than expected." Lindiao looked up quietly but said nothing. For the first time all night, Beatrice suddenly sounded nervous around her own daughter. "It was just a misunderstanding," she continued quickly. "You know how stressful events can become. Seating arrangements get confusing sometimes." Lindiao stared at her for a few seconds. A misunderstanding. The words almost felt insulting after everything that had happened. The lonely table, the public humiliation, cold smile, the way everyone watched her walk across the restaurant alone. None of that had been confusion, and they both knew it. Lindiao slowly placed her glass down on the table. Then she smiled softly. Not angry, not loud, just tired. "No," she said quietly. It was intentional. The words landed heavily between them. Beatrice's smile twitched slightly. Around the room, Conversations started dying again as guests realized something serious was happening. Lin Dao's eyes never left her mother's face. "You didn't accidentally put me at that table," she continued calmly. "You chose that table before I even arrived." Beatrice immediately tried to interrupt Lin Dao, but this time Lin Dao didn't let her. "For years," she said softly, "you made me feel like I was something the family needed to hide." The pain in her voice was quiet, but it hit harder than shouting ever could. Amara looked down at the floor. Tendai suddenly became very interested in his drink again. Nobody at the family table could even pretend anymore, because the truth was sitting in the middle of the restaurant now for everyone to see. Lin Dao gave one small sad smile before saying the sentence that completely shattered the room. "You just never expected me to matter." Silence. Complete silence. Even nearby waiters froze for a second. Beatrice opened her mouth, but no words came out, because there was nothing she could deny. Not after tonight. Not after publicly treating her own daughter like she was unimportant, only to discover she was the most powerful person in the building. And standing there under the bright restaurant lights, surrounded by watching strangers, Beatrice finally looked exactly like what she truly was for the first time all night. Not proud. Not respected. Just deeply ashamed. Lin Dao didn't say anything more after that. She didn't need to. The silence in the restaurant already said everything. Later that night, while the celebration downstairs slowly fell apart, Lin Dao calmly made her final decision from her private table. No anger in her face. No shouting. Just complete clarity. She opened her phone and sent one short message to her legal team. "Cancel all active partnerships linked to my family approvals." That was it. Simple. Clean. Final. Within hours, things started shifting outside that room. Business ties that once quietly supported parts of her extended family were reviewed and withdrawn. Financial access that had been taken for granted suddenly disappeared. Not out of revenge, but out of boundaries that should have existed long ago. People who once ignored her were now trying to understand what had just changed. But Lin Dao was no longer in that noise. She had already left the main hall. The city air outside felt different when she stepped onto the private rooftop section of the restaurant. The noise from the celebration below faded into the background as soft ocean winds moved through the space. Cape Town sparkled under her feet, lights reflecting on the water like scattered gold. For the first time that night, Lin Dao finally breathed properly. A waiter quietly served her dinner at a table facing the ocean. No crowd. No whispers. No judgment. Just silence and space that felt like it belonged to her. Her phone vibrated on the table. Once. Then again. Beatrice calling. Then Amara. Then more messages followed. Lin Dao glanced at the screen for a moment. And then slowly, she turned it face down. Ignored. Not out of hate, but out of peace. She picked up her glass, looked at the city glowing below her, and finally let herself relax. Everything they tried to take from her emotionally had only made her stronger. And now, for the first time, she wasn't sitting where they placed her. She was exactly where she belonged. They tried to hide me at the back table, but the entire room belonged to me.